This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and this is the Constitutional Government series, lecture video series. This is part 3, and freedom of speech is the topic for this video. Alright, freedom of speech. As I brought out in the freedom of religion, the Constitution is not to be construed to allow or permit or whatever criminal behavior, discriminatory behavior, segregatory behavior, abusive behavior, blah, 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 blah. The theme is love. If people are not loving each other, if they're not treating people equally, they're violating the Constitution and must be held accountable. Equality over majority. This is not a democracy. We are not a democracy. The majority are not supposed to rule. It is a constitutional republic where everybody is to be treated equally and allow constitutional law to govern their behavior. And here we have freedom of speech. With Trump taking office, and he was illegitimate. He did not win the majority vote. He lost by at least 3 million. And it's clear that 52% of women voting for him, no. If the election was rigged, the election was altered, and Russia is known to have access to our voting booths, to our voting machines, and the people in charge of the voting machines are refusing to allow an audit to determine whether there was tampering with the election, and Trump isn't pursuing an investigation because he won. And so the freedom of speech has been denied to the American people. And the type of freedom of speech that has been denied is the one in which the people's vote has been altered. They are now claiming something that they didn't claim. And that's fraud, voter fraud in this case. And so with modern technology, people can take my video and alter the words that I use in the video and create a whole scenario where it's portrayed as me speaking, but the things that I'm supposedly saying are not what I actually said. And that's a crime. You can't do that unless you make it known right up front that this is a farcical reconstruction of certain videos done by Travis Wayne Goodsell. You have to acknowledge and let people know the work that you produce and put out. And so to present myself without my authorization, without my approval, and let people believe that it is me is a crime. You'll notice that if you go to type in Travis Wayne Goodsell, there will be a whole list of videos, and you'll see that there are people who have videos about my books and my audiobooks, but it's a trap where you have to click on a link to go to another website, and then you have to pay them. You know, it's a trap, and it's a crime, because it's, if they did obtain my audios or my books, and they're reselling it, they're doing it without my permission, and I'm not getting paid for it. So you can see right here on YouTube that there's criminal action going on, and it's so voluminous that I've given up trying to report each and every single occurrence to YouTube for them to take action and pull down the video sites. So you can see that freedom of speech is abused. The previous one was on religion, and I briefly touched on religious speech. Religions also do not have the right to speak in a manner that violates others' rights. They're not allowed to speak criminal behavior and encourage criminal behavior. Unless, like I said, like the Simpsons, for example, it's a full portrayal of criminal behavior and encouragement of criminal behavior, but it is a satirical comedy. And it's Fox that really is in trouble for originally putting it during the cartoon time frame for kids rather than during the adult hours of the evening. And that resulted in a homemaker mother complaining to Fox about The Simpsons and saying it was horrible and atrocious and my children were exposed to it. If they just advertised it properly as an adult satirical comedy, The Simpsons wouldn't be as popular as it is today, and it probably would have died out after a year or two. But because of that Southern California mother, The Simpsons is going on season 30 next month, I believe. So yeah, kudos to The Simpsons. But under Trump, Trump ran his presidential campaign according to his book, The Art of War, in which he says that he uses hyperbole. And hyperbole means lies. And so Trump went on his presidential campaign utilizing hyperbole. And his experience with the WWE helped him to perpetuate his base and rile them up, and all of it based on lies. And Crooked Hillary, that was involved with the Russian scandal and Cambridge Analytica with Facebook's stolen data. America got played big time by the abuse of freedom of speech. All the advertising on Facebook, you can't say whatever you want. If it is a lie, if it's criminal behavior or encouraging criminal behavior, you can't do it. That's not your right. You are free to speak as long as you don't violate others' rights. Also in the First Amendment is the right to peacefully assemble. This has to do with freedom of speech as well. I'll get to that later, but with freedom of speech, people are allowed to protest, but they can't prevent people from speaking unless the speech is hate speech. Then it can't continue. So for governments to allow white supremacists, Nazis, KKK, to hold rallies. Even Trump, his Twitter. He needs to be banned from Twitter. He needs to be banned from social media. It doesn't matter if he's the president. He is not above the law. He cannot violate the freedom of speech. And what he is doing is destroying our Constitution and our rights. And that he needs to be stopped. And it's, petition for redress of grievances is being denied to the American people because of the abuses of our president. And he's an illegitimate president to boot. He should be removed from office along with his whole administration because he was not put into the presidency legitimately. The vote was fraudulent. But nobody's talking about doing that. Nobody's making efforts towards that. They're all focusing on Trump and Trump alone. And, that would mean Pence gets put into presidency. We don't want Pence either. Why? Because of his abuse of freedom of speech. He has previously talked about violating the rights of other people and utilizing his religion to do the violation of other people's rights. And so Pence also is guilty of violating the First Amendment in abusing the right to free speech. I'll address it with the petitioning for redress of grievances. I have been victimized by Utah for my free speech rights. And it involved petitioning the government of Utah for a redress of grievances concerning my children who were kidnapped by their mother and who fled the country to Canada with them. And the government didn't want to hear it and silenced me from petitioning. And I was denied a trial and was removed from society. And so freedom of speech is vital to a free nation, to a constitutional republic. You have to allow people to speak. And people are saying truth to power. I finally found that it comes from an inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power. People need to be careful about catchphrases. If it's legitimate, fine, but the catchphrase I use is equality over majority. Equal rights, not democracy. Democracy is majority rights, majority rules. And we do not want a government of majority rules. And as you can see, this is why. We have one party who dominates all three branches of government, and their way goes. And all the protesters are not being allowed to speak. And this has to do with petitioning for a redress of grievances, but they're being denied their right to free speech when the police arrest them. Now the police, have their tactic for justifying the arrests by saying they are causing a public disturbance. Seriously, public disturbance when people are protesting unfair government practices of which they have already been victimized. Are you serious? And none of these people get a trial, because if they insist on having a trial, they get locked up in jail for, at least a year or so before the trial ever proceeds. So their life is ruined, and then finally in the trial, they would be found innocent, but their life is destroyed. You know, they get released and they go back to nothing. And that's what happens in our nation. 95% of all arrests do not go to trial. In Utah, it's 98%. Utah makes sure nobody goes to trial. Only high-profile cases and rich people go to trial. Everybody else gets abused by the system. They do not get a voice. They do not get heard. In Utah, if you're accused, you're guilty. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. And that needs to stop. We're a constitutional republic. We are all guaranteed equal rights and due process. We are allowed to speak freely, not to take away other rights, not to promote criminal behavior, not to commit criminal behavior, but to declare truth. And so that's simple. It shouldn't be complicated. You know, you don't name call other people. There's a logical naming for that kind of argument. It's called an ad hominem. You know, you can't do that. You can't lie. You can't abuse others with speech. You have to be nice. You got to love people. And unfortunately, the hearts of many have waxed cold. And that's a sad situation we live in this nation. So this was quick and easy. So we'll go on to posting this and go on to freedom of the press.